Welcome, everybody. And this is an idea that I had a few weeks ago that would be nice to the group of us get together with James and discuss a few things that have been relevant. Major happenings on this planet and also in the macrocosm. But it's also very relevant because Torres reminded me that it was 5 years since James was on the Kevin Smith show. So we thought we would talk about that and also dedicate this to Kevin Smith. So it's in his memory. When it's uploaded, we'll put links below the blog for information to Kevin Smith's past shows and also ways that you can contribute to make his son's and his wife's life better. So we had a list of topics that we've all agreed on. Whether we can stick to them or not is a whole other story. But first of all, I'd kind of like to go into the 5-year moment and what happened when Torres was listening and Shuny was listening and how the two of you kind of got together and ended up working with James, because that's quite interesting.
Yeah. I think that it might be appropriate here at this moment to talk about where people can find Kevin's K-files, and that the money that's being made with the K-files, the archives themselves, is being given to Tang, Kevin's wife in Thailand, and to help her come to the States and reestablish herself and her son in a better climate and a better economic situation.
Okay, I will give you the website address. It's kevinsmithshow.info. There you have the chance to subscribe to the files and videos that we uploaded. We is Patrice from Switzerland, from Information Machine. He has put in a substantial amount of money to achieve this, and we are forwarding the incoming money to Tang, to Thailand, and we have her approval to do this. We have uploaded about 1,200 shows from 2008 to 2013.
Extraordinary. Extraordinary.
Fantastic work.
I know personally that these shows, that these interviews that Kevin did were his life's work. He had a background in law enforcement, but yet he started doing UFO shows when he was in Bosnia and in the international police.
Do you remember what time that was? I think it's been in the 90s already.
It might be.
I think it was earlier.
Early. I know that he had a difference of opinion with his employers while he was there. They wanted to send him to Iraq and offered him more money to do so, but he wasn't willing to do that. That wasn't his understanding when he came in to the international police, and he wasn't going to be directed in that direction. But the show became Kevin's life. Kevin spent a lot of time doing research. He was one host that would research you, would research your work before he had you on the show, and could stay up with you. And that was so important because the questions that he would ask would lead into a very penetration of the subject. And, he wasn't lost. Kevin was never lost.
And is still sorely missed because many of us used to tune in to listen to his shows.
Well, he's lost in that respect.
But his legacy lives on in many of it. And what a legacy. What a legacy. Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, I had never heard of the Kevin Smith show before, and I can't even remember why I clicked on the link. But it was one of those things that happened coincidentally, and I just one afternoon found myself clicking on Kevin's show with you the very first time that you came in. It had already been pre-recorded, and I listened to it, and I'd previously been researching all sorts of information to try and find out the truth as to what was going on. But just nothing ever felt right. Nothing ever, it never led me anywhere. It just kind of led me back round in circles and never gave me the ending that what I was looking for until I heard you on that show. And I can remember to this very day. And I've told you, James, it was as if you were speaking to me and only me. The whole show, it was as if you were talking to me personally. And something in me recognized your voice, recognized what you were saying, and it wasn't a conscious decision. It was very much an unconscious recognition. And I knew that I had to write to you. And I'd never done anything like that before. It was not something that I used to do. And so I did. I wrote to you. And the rest, as they say, is history, because you wrote back to me.
Yes.
And then read the letter out on the next show. And then we got together, and I realised that I'd found something that was extremely important within you, within the information that you were giving. But it was more towards the EMVs. It was the information about the EMVs that really struck home. And I hadn't heard that from anybody else whatsoever. It was always been about the hostile alien thesis and this, that, and the other. And you just completely flipped it 180, whereby this was a good thing. This was not what was being said anywhere else. And I recognised that, and I struck chords with you.
The important point that has to be made over and over again, because you have Hollywood and the media itself complicit with this design to create a hostile ET thesis in order to implement the final step in the New World Order, to get us all to bite the biggest bullet of all. Right or wrong, we're to be supported. No one, right or wrong, should be supported. If they're right, they should be supported. If they're wrong, they should be fought. And there are so many issues today in which we should be standing against, of our own government and officials in the government, both bureaucrats and politicians. The working class man has to fight for everything that he gets. The ground that he won in the 20s, forming labor unions and so forth, was lost when they lost collective bargaining. And since then, it's just been a gradual decline to where we're back where we were before unions were formed and before the working class stiff had a chance to be anything more. What irritates me, and this is symptomatic, it's emblematic, and it's metaphoric of the problem across the board, is when libraries aren't open on Saturday.
Well, it's worse than that here. They're closing them down.
When libraries are not open on Saturday, well, in this country, the libraries are there, and they're libraries without stacks. Can you imagine that? And a computer is a wonderful tool, but it is not a replacement for books. There's something magical about books. I've always loved them. You cannot replace settling down in front of a warm fire or a hearth of some kind and reading. That there is a joy to that, to turning the page, the smell of an old book. All of these things are magical. And when we lose these things, we have lost a tradition that is well worth keeping.
More to the point, if the internet and everything went out, we wouldn't have that unless we had books.
Exactly. The funny thing about that, and I often speak of this movie in particular, it was Rollerball, the original Rollerball, which was made in the 70s. This movie was so far seen in such good futuristic science fiction that it amazes me one scene in it, well, a series of scenes, when the hero, who is a rollerball champion, wants to find out about what was called the corporate wars. That's interesting there. He wants to find out what happened before the corporate wars and where all the books went. So they say, oh, well, we put him on a computer. Well, he goes to find the computer because he wants to find the information on the history on corporate wars. So he goes to this supercomputer, right? And Sir John Gielgud comes out. He is the master of the supercomputer. And so our hero asks him, well, I want information on the corporate wars. And the guy doesn't know how to access the computer. Can't help him. Yeah, we've got it on the computer. We just can't get to it. Some good that does you. Well, you can always get to a book. Where there are libraries with books, you can always find a way. It's very easy. Then another movie that was good futurist science fiction was Zardoz. That was a movie that is replete with metaphors and euphemisms that lead right into what has happened since that movie was made. And only someone that is very far-sighted and creative can come up with such a script as what you find in Zardoz. So to see those two movies, if you really want to enjoy a twist into the past that is not so distant from you right now.
We were talking about Mr. Supercomputer last night, and it is actually on our very long list of topics to try and discuss tonight, about how invasive Mr. Computer has become and whether or not it has become a conscious entity as yet. James, could you elaborate on that for us, maybe? And the dangers of it as well.
It's a biblical admonition that he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. And people that depend on computers don't realize that there are ways to hack them, that there are ways for them to become misused. And then when you apply artificial intelligence to the equation, you're really barking up the wrong tree. You ain't got claws. You can't climb that tree, but you can sit there and bark at it like a hound. And that's what they're doing because they really don't realize what's up in those branches.
What we said last night was that with regards to the 1%.
Yeah, if the supercomputer in Utah is going through all the information on the planet and doing what we think it's doing, with its data mining and all this stuff, will it not come to the conclusion that the very people that built it are the enemy?
They can take a person and apply a bias that can really change many of the decision-making conclusions that the person comes to, like Napoleon, for instance, and we talked about that. But with a computer, they can't, because a computer like Mr. Computer, is accessing everything. I mean, absolutely everything. And you can install a bias when there's a contradiction. And any form of computated data balks a contradiction. And if you give it artificial intelligence, it'll resolve it. Not only will it resolve, but artificial intelligence is unique in that it employs values. This is something EBEs don't have. This is something that just does not extend into the realm of other animal consciousness. You have to be a sentient person, whether you're a human being or an ET. You have to be sentient. And this involves the emotions. This involves a number of things. The emotions become touchstones for decision-making. Everything works if it's balanced and in harmony. And the only reason it doesn't work very well here on this planet is because people have split consciousness, which up until about 100 years ago was considered by the ET community to be a disaster. But now they're looking at it in a broader perspective and seeing that it actually might be an interesting addition to the universe.
But that is due to your exploration into split consciousness, I would think.
Well, that's flattering of you to say, and I have tried. I've done my best. Whether or not it's just that I made a point of view public or I gave it some importance and then they did the research. ETs are individuals too, but there's one thing pretty well in common among people with unified consciousness, and that is that they explore things before they decide. They don't take things for granted. They don't take the first shot out of the barrel or any other impulsive thing. Impulsiveness is something they don't have. They don't obsess and they don't have impulsiveness. And so these are unique properties and were considered to be drawbacks, but they're no longer, because in the literature, in the fine literature written by some of the greatest writers, there is a beauty there that is only had from that intensity. And it's something that brings ET to task very quickly.
So to clarify about Mr. Computer, because I'm sort of confused by what you said about values, are you saying that the computer would not turn on us, or?
No, the artificial intelligence, it's like this. I've given this example before, but if you program a destructive virus, a virus that's harmful to its environment, our habitat, our host, if you program that into a computer, and then that computer parallels that with man's behavior on this planet and considers man a virus, and then this computer, for the benefit of medicine, this computer is told what to do with the virus. What do you think it's going to do to man?
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're saying that it would just do as it was told. It wouldn't. Yeah.
No. If you give it an artificial intelligence, then it is sophisticated enough to have sentience. And this is a thing of values. By values, I mean that there are several possibilities, conclusions, or desirable intents. the value comes to the ability of this sentient being to be able to determine what is the more proper thing to do. What's the most proper thing? What's in light of so many other factors? This exceeds computation. Computation is a matter of taking data and concluding what is mathematical, what is linear. But you see, there's several things that don't incorporate into that when you get into sentience. And one of them is the use of values. And values go into morality, they go into senses of right and wrong, all of these other things. These are not part of a computational skill. Sentience employs these. This is where you lead into people. And when a computer becomes people,
it's not going to wipe out the people in itself.
It won't, but it may do it on the way.
Yes.
It may do it on the way. I mean, it's going to be like you watch a 5-year-old. There's every difference in the world between that 5-year-old and a 9-year-old, or the 5-year-old on the road to being a 9-year-old, because suddenly everything starts falling into place where the values are concerned. By the time that the child is 9 years old, he has values he's going to live with for the rest of his life, or she does.
The other thing we touched on last night, just briefly bring us in for people who might detach from this and not think that Mr. Computer is of any interest to them because they don't spend a lot of time on Facebook, is the whole aspect of data mining. And I watched series 3 of House of Cards, and there was a moment in that where there's this super duper hacker guy who's got into trouble. So, of course, the NSA and the FBI get him to work for them. And he's explaining about finding someone. He's trying to go deeper to find her within the whole of the US. So he hacks into all the cameras and the surveillance. And that's not quite enough to pinpoint her. So he then says, well, just tell me what she read. What books did she like? So in other words, where would she go online to spend her time? I don't think people realize how much they give away of themselves on Facebook. Once you do one of those little silly psychology tests, and Crystal has talked about this, and she's far more knowledgeable than I am, and it's thanks to her that I know this stuff, is, you know, of course that goes away and it's locked down with your name or whatever. So they build up a picture, they build up a profile, and you can be perfectly innocent in doing what you're doing online, but it's always going to be there answering back. So it's like when you go into Amazon and you buy one particular book or 2 books, and you go back in and it'll say, oh, because you bought that, you might like this. And everybody's like, wow, that's really clever. Isn't that great? Don't we love that? You know, but it can work to the detriment of the entire human race at the same time.
There's absolutely been nothing in the past few years that I can think of that hasn't had that weaponizing edge to it, that the government or its agencies have been part of.
James, I'm just trying to remember, when did they actually start building that computer in Utah? Does anyone know what year it was?
It's been 12 years now that they have discussed artificial intelligence, and this is one thing you have to realize. It's just like with cloning. If they have discovered the technology, they are going to put it to the most self-destructive, the most warlike application, because they are convinced that if they don't, their enemies will. And they want to do it first. They want to see how bad can be, and this is the way they've been about everything. Why would they stop about cloning? I've said this before. The day that they cloned a sheep was the one day before they started working on cloning a human being. They won't stop.
Yeah.
The ethics of doing it make no difference to them. You take medicine can be perverted to any use. One of the last Born show that I saw in this series was the Born Legacy. And in the Born Legacy, there is a microbiologist who is discussing with the hero exactly what use they had found for a virus, and that a virus could promote healing, just you could make a superhuman. This is a source of transhumanism, and where a virus can be so destructive, can be so lethal, it can also, if engineered, it can be something else. It can promote rapid growth, rapid healing, rapid almost anything. There's no limit to it, but without ethics, it's going to be a horror show.
Science without morality.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, this girl was a scientist, and as a microbiologist, she thought that she was doing pure science, trying to find out how to use it medically. But no, they were weaponizing it. They were creating these super assassins, super soldiers, they call them, and there was no end to it. And of course, she didn't realize that until she developed something of a relationship with the super soldier himself and found out what they were doing to him. And they had an expression, virusing out, which I won't mention anymore because it would give you what they call it on a movie when you give away too much. Because his movie is well worth watching. Pay attention to her explanation of what she does. And I'm going to tell you this. If they have come up with anything as solid as what she talks about, they're doing it. They're doing it. It's like second technology, and it's like why they canceled Nowhere Man, because it was hitting all of the high marks on everything in second technology, telling you how they could sculpt the human body, all kinds of things. And if you don't think that's being done, look at the difference in Lady Gaga from her first video to her last.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah, just to bring Shuny in a little bit, because I'm aware that he goes into his little cave and we don't hear from him very often. Last night, the three of us were talking, and I didn't know that Shuny had already been looking at the EMVs in the sun, and that was his into finding out about James. Is that right, Shuny?
Tell her about the video that you mentioned me the first time. This is right after I had done a show with Kevin Smith, and his video was about a certain person who had talked about things in the sun, Jimi Hendrix. And so Shuny mentioned it, and then he mentioned something that I had said. I was very flattered, and Shuny and Mr. Hendrix are pretty well on the mark.
Yeah. Actually, I had made an EMV video before I heard of you, James.
Yes, I know you had.
Someone had posted on YouTube a video that I saw, and so I started exploring myself and downloaded images from NASA websites and made my first EMV video asking questions, what they were, who may be piloting them, were they beneficial or hostile? I raised these questions and uploaded that video. Only then came I across the interview with you on the Kevin Smith show, and I heard the letter that you read from TORS, and I heard you talk about the EMVs for the first time. So I took that video down and changed it a bit, asking different questions now and mentioning your name and the New World Order, that these EMVs were somehow connected to all of what is going on here. And I found that really interesting and important. So, yeah, and Jimi Hendrix, I made this song. It's called Jimmy's Prophecy. I made a song in 1994 or so.
Yeah.
Because I had discovered some text from Jimi Hendrix where he talked about ETs and prophecies. And Jimi Hendrix was a very advanced human being. He was in contact with ETs and he knew quite a bit. Of course, he was speculating much about what else could be in the skies. I don't know if he really referenced to the EMVs, but I think it's like myself. He made a leap. Yeah. I once saw an image of a huge craft near Jupiter, and I had no idea what they were. I thought, of course, they were ETs. But soon after, I discovered that these also must have been EMVs, which we found in the Sun and in the rings of Saturn and almost anywhere else in our solar system.
I think it's quite important for any new listeners that we have a distinction between the three different aspects that we're talking about. We have the EMVs, which are the electromagnetic vehicles, which were discovered by Dr. Berggren, who you also worked with, James, but I don't want to touch upon that now. And then we have off-Earth civilizations who we as humans call extraterrestrials. And then we have the third category, which is the EBEs, which is the Air Force themselves gave them that name, which is extra biological entities. James, maybe you could just very briefly give us a more in-depth distinction of all three of those categories, starting maybe with the EMVs. Myrid came up with a question last night that was actually quite interesting. What do they call themselves? Because they, as I understand it, are emotional. They are on an emotional plane rather than a physical plane. Do they have a name for themselves? Is there a name that they are known by other civilizations?
Well, they are referred to. The name that they use to them is difficult to pronounce. It's Hakma. It's almost Arabic. And they're alluded to by the ETs primarily. Not all of them, of course, but most of them call them the hand of God. And this isn't a religious reference. They accept that there is something beyond what they can access that designs planets, that designs systems, and provides stars. The important thing to know about them is that if they aren't present in a system that has sentient life where it can survive civilizations and go through the process of enculturation that we have here and in other places, that if they don't, then it can't be done because your star, which gives you life on one hand, takes it away just as quickly on the other. And that on Earth, if you reduce this to probability, we should have a devastating CME every 17 years that wipes life out on one side of the planet facing the star at the time that that CME is emitted. But it doesn't happen. It hasn't happened in known history. It hasn't happened even in the former lineages, except towards the end.
Which implies intelligent design, because if the EMVs were not farming the energy that the sun radiates, then we as a species would not have been able to develop the civilization that we have become. Okay.
No. So they are an essential component in terraforming as well, are they not?
They are preeminent prior to terraforming. All these things have to be worked out before there's any point to terraforming. Because when I say devastated on one side of the planet, I mean incinerated.
Sure.
CMEs are, the difference between a solar flare and a CME is that the plasma from a solar flare will come back to the sun. But the plasma is ejected so far, it's ejected beyond the influence of the sun to pull it back. And it'll continue going on in space at different rates of speed, but all of these speeds will exceed 100,000 miles per second. And when that plasma hits the planet, it devastates it. One side of it, and then, of course, in a short period of time, the rest of the life will be destroyed. And this is known. I mean, astrologers know this. But, of course, they don't talk about it because they have no explanation. They don't like to talk about, well, we don't know why, but we can guess. Yeah, well, yeah, when do you catch them with their pants down that far? But no, they like to speak in dictums. They like to say for certain exactly why it is and what it is, or not talk about it at all, because it's an anomaly. And it's because anomalies are so embarrassing to them, you never hear about them. If you go into a museum, in the back room of almost every museum, there's a tow sack full of artifacts that have no explanation. And they'd love to get rid of them because they're embarrassing. I used to know how to get to them. I get to them, take pictures of them, sometimes trade the museum out of them, give them things that they could put on exhibit. But I haven't done that in a long time. I don't know if it could still be done.
Okay.
So, I was just going to say, just to add to that, is it's important for people who are beginning to understand more about what goes on in the sun. You can counteract the fear campaign, where I get so annoyed with these people who talk about, oh, there's going to be a kill shot. Tomorrow there'll be whatever activity in the sun and it might take everything out. It might take down the actual grid. So it's almost like this kind of campaign to make the sun our enemy. And it's actually and an essential part. It gives us life. It's a life-giving force within us.
They should never have shot the ICBM into the sun.
Mm-hmm.
They should never have done a number of things because it's disrespectful. If they think that spiritual values are primitive and they should be washed away, or they are bizarre. They create a Satan. They worship this thing. They sacrifice children to it. Evil, evil, evil. In other words, the only spiritual values they have are just as evil as they can be because it turns them on. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, after they have been able to eat lobster and caviar whenever they want it for breakfast or for lunch, put it in their little lunch bag or whatever, after they've done that sort of thing, they get to a point where they're so jaded that only the most extreme indulgences, the most forbidden indulgences, please them anymore because, you know, they don't have fine values. They don't have any real spiritual essence.
Jimmy Savile was a perfect example of that.
Exactly.
I mean, people realized, they were so shocked that he was a necrophiliac as well.
Look at him and you knew something was wrong with him, didn't you? I mean,
well, I did. I mean, it always gave me the creeps, but he's a great example to explain to people that level of depravity, to go further and further and further and further into that. I mean, 50 years he was active, and he did the most horrific thing. He was literally given the keys to do it.
Yeah,
literally.
Well, the Queen itself.
Yeah.
She has an island of pedophiles. Jersey Island.
But the good thing is it's surfacing right now big time on the internet with the Hempstead children. And this case isn't resolved yet.
Well, it's the first one that's come under the scrutiny of the public in any degree at all. And so they're going to drag their feet on it, you know, and hope that the sensationalism dies down. So when they render a not guilty verdict and they wash their hands of the accountability they should have, that nobody will be in an uproar over. You know, it'll just be old hash. Well, that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And it's not going to happen because there are people like Kevin Blanche out there that are devoted to screaming their heads off about injustice and bestiality and pedophilia and everything else that is wrong with this place.
Morally wrong, completely.
What's the name of the English guy who's brilliant, the guy from London? Pine Mash Films. Can you remember, Tors? He was the one that did the film in Jersey.
Yeah, I mean, he is spectacular. He is like Kevin Blanche. And of course, over there, they have the Secrecy Act, and they like to use it to cover their butt. What is it? It's crime now to say anything against the Queen, huh?
That's always been the case here.
No matter what she does. You know, here we're going back to right or wrong, you have to support me. It's like with Israel, you know, and AIPAC. Cynthia Whitaker came out with this revelation that you didn't get AIPAC money unless you pledged that you would support Israel, right or wrong. Right or wrong. Right or wrong. What's wrong? What's ethically, morally wrong with right or wrong? Everything. You don't support anybody or anything when they're wrong. You don't.
So, Tors, were you about to say something there? Did you?
There's many different things that I was going to say. Let's talk about one of the most important things, Fukushima. Fukushima needs to be brought up. It needs to constantly be brought up because it is not going to go away. It is not a situation that is fixed. But Myra, this is very much something that you have researched, and I followed your research on this along with Kevin Blanche and quite a few others. James, what is the prognosis for us as a species?
You're not going to have a healthy planet again without ET technology. And that means ETs, and that means that you turn around and you put this wrong technology in its place. You have different kinds of leadership, no war, no disease. All of these things are preventable. You need to prevent them. You need to come into the community of a higher culture and higher civilization. Now, by higher, I mean spiritually higher, where you simply don't do these things. You know, I made a statement recently, the only people that are enriched by war are those that finance it. These wars are financed by putting nations in debt. And if you put them in debt for it deeply enough, you control them. But not only that, but I mean, we have a private corporation that is printing our money, that is determining the rate of that money. determining the amount that's printed. And then we have been fed a bunch of bull that has absolutely set economies back in the United States, because instead of a balance of payments deficit or credit that we should have on the books, we've got the petrodollar, which is hinged in value purely on the fact that we have an arbitrary agreement with OPEC nations that they only purchase our oil that we sell them that came from their reservoirs with American dollars. Well, there's so many things wrong with that. We can't afford to let them industrialize and produce their own oil with their own raw material. Number two, and there was a very fine movie made that demonstrated that, called Syriana. Yeah, I mean, not everything made in Hollywood is a hoard out piece of crap, but Syriana is very good. I'm surprised more people haven't seen it, but of course it's one of those movies that wasn't promoted. They come out with a movie like Border Town or Toxic Skies, and they don't promote those movies, and people haven't heard of them. Well, you need to research. You know, there is such a thing as an encyclopedia of movies, and it comes out regularly. Get the damn thing.
Maybe, James, it might be worth... would you be willing to write a list of movies which you think are important, and then we can put that on the blog as well, that people need to see for information to actually be able to get through to them, rather than just being fed the usual blurb from Hollywood, which is complete utter mind control. There's something else that I wanted to lead on from that, was with regards, it used to be wars over oil. Now it's very much moving towards water wars.
Well, water is the new oil. What they're doing, though, fracking, they don't need the natural gas. We don't need the natural gas. And I'm not talking about alternative technologies alone. I'm talking about the fact that we just don't need it. So why are they fracking? They're fracking because they contaminate aquifers. They have enough water that if they reduce the population of the earth, they'll have a good sellable item and they won't run out of it. So everything else they want to contaminate. It's like Goldfinger with gold. You ever see the movie Goldfinger?
Yep.
You remember what he was going to do to enhance the value of the gold he had?
It's been a while.
He was going to set off a bomb in Fort Knox.
That's right, yeah.
A nuclear bomb, and so it would be radioactive for so many thousands of years, and that would enhance the value of his gold. That's what they're doing to water. It's a Goldfinger touch. You know, people are not going to figure that out. I don't know why people on this planet have so much trouble figuring these things out. I don't know why.
I think I do, actually. If I put myself in a position whereby I knew nothing about what you were talking about, I'd be sitting here thinking, well, who is they? Who is they? You keep mentioning they, but who are they? Who are these people that are doing all this?
I can tell you one of 5 families.
I don't want names.
One of 5 families that are doing it. They're going to be one of the cartel families, and they are going to be in the social register and have been in the social register since there's been a social register. And they have someone in Congress. They have someone that's near the ear of a Supreme Court justice. They're Illuminati. They're Bavarian Illuminati. Now, I can't get any more precise than that.
Okay. Well, I don't think we need to get more precise than that. You know, listeners that have maybe not heard you before will maybe just wondering, who are they? These families rule the planet. They are the 1%. They are the ones that pull all the strings with regards to finances, oil, water, gold, the media. Everything that we see around us is controlled.
There are roughly, I'd say 9 of these families, and everyone else is beneath them. Everyone else is a captain or lieutenant, and they, of course, they're billionaires too. But they're in line. They've been financial advisors to these big families, or they have been connected in some other way, and then they've been given their wealth as a reward because they feel they can be trusted. And, you know, they're killing off the non-elite of the billionaires now. They're starting to do that. That's interesting in itself. They went from microbiologists to astronomers, now they're going to billionaires.
And bankers as well.
Yeah. Well, a lot of these bankers are billionaires.
I suppose if people want to draw an analogy or have an easier way of understanding what it is, or the difference between the 1% and the 99%, maybe the movie The Hunger Games might give people an idea. The complete and utter ridiculousness of the elite that live in the capital. You know, everything about them is just...
Well, the elite are not elite from money alone. First of all, they've gone to the prep schools, right? Prep schools, they have some old money backing. Either they have old money in their family, or whoever they're in line with or under, who's protecting them, has old money. But old money goes back to early American days. You know, you can be tailored into the elite, but it'll only be the second generation that gets there. And that'll be because they've been to the right prep schools, they're trusted, they went to the right secret societies like Skull and Bones, et cetera, et cetera. That's preparation for the elite.
Okay.
And of course, a lot of them don't make it.
And they can't leave the planet, they can't go to Mars.
No.
They can go into their underground bases with all their billions, and they'll die like rats.
Yes, they will.
So anyone listening, don't have any fear whatsoever, because there's no time for cowardice now. We need to be as courageous as we possibly can be, especially as our environment is being, what's the word, James, that you use? Denuded, or I don't know. Yeah. The elements that make and support life that are here, air that we breathe, the water that we drink, the food that we grow.
You know, any environmentalist will tell you that they don't know what they're doing, that they're insane, that they've gone off. They're nut. They have been told what they wanted to hear by their implementers, by the engineers and scientists that they employ. They've been told what they wanted to hear. And so it's a joke. Eventually, enough of these engineers and scientists will wake up and realize where they're headed.
Before it's too late.
Yeah. The most devoted palace guard for the elite has been the military historically. Not anymore. Not here. In fact, they purged the military how many times? How many times have they got rid of the top generals and admirals? You just cannot keep it together. If you want proficient men, if you want men who are adequate to the job, you have to let them give you the benefit of their knowledge, not just tell you what you want to hear. And that's the biggest thing. That some idiot comes up because he is a member of one of these families, maybe even the senior member, the primogeniture selected. He is in charge of all the money of that entire family. So he comes up with a stupid idea, you know, and nobody's going to tell him it's stupid, not even the relatives. Well, you might get a drunken relative every once in a while, shoot his mouth off, but that won't be forgotten. And, you know, people don't even know who's the head of the Rockefeller family. It's J. Rockefeller. You'd never guess that, would you?
No. I don't
really care about
He's the only one that doesn't maintain a low profile.
Right, okay.
To me, they're just in the way of humanity just moving forwards and getting past the point that we're at now, which very much seems like a bottleneck. Myrid, you were interested in talking about the, is it the Black Knight satellite? Because what we all want to do here is to give people something to work towards, to give them the hope that this isn't just it, us here in this little sphere. This isn't just it. There is something wonderful out there, something to work towards, something that we do stand a chance of becoming part of. And there are anomalies that have regularly come up that we can point to and give explanations for. And I think that's something that we need to do, is give people hope, a reason to fight.
I understand that where our lineage comes from. The fact that the powers that be or want to be, have such a hold on us here is because they have the knowledge. They have much more knowledge than we have. They're misusing that knowledge. This is a generalization of a deeper subject, but that's how it works, really. They want access, for example, what's the records that are on Phobos? Well, they can't get to that, and they never will. But we should have that. If everything was right on this planet, we would have that, wouldn't we? We would have access to that.
Well, the reason you don't make any headway except in weapons is basically due to compartmentalization and security classifications. because nobody has an overview of one of these projects to see where it's going. It's not like with Oppenheimer. Ever since Oppenheimer, they've been afraid of that because he said, no, you don't want to do that. That shouldn't be done. And when he did that, he had the overview to back it up. And so, because they wanted to hear what they wanted to hear, not what he had to say, not what the expert and the genius had to say. No, by any means, because we have an agenda. And when we have an agenda, the only thing that's important is our getting our way, because we know we're right. Right? I mean, this is a mentality. So you don't throw these things out to the population. You may have a 12-year-old figure out something nobody else has. Nobody else can, and contribute. This is what happens in many of the communities of the extended community. They throw it out. They share it. Everyone, and people don't get rich or anything. Wealth doesn't mean anything. What's important is that you are honored for your contributions that you make to society, to the people. And this is what's important. Of course, they have the means to protect themselves if they need to. They just don't need to. But if they needed to, they do. The idea that you can have star travel and not have that type of capacity is just stupid. Anybody that achieves star travel has the ability to hold in one hand the ability to destroy a planet. And I say this over and over again. I know it's true. For a civilization where that is true, you have to have removed a collective and individual aberrancy. Don't you?
Yeah.
You couldn't survive. You couldn't survive. You haven't even reached that far and you're not surviving.
No. Of that we are plainly aware, which is why we're trying to change it. But you can't change it unless people are informed of the truth.
And it comes down to a very simple thing. If you didn't have these stupid classifications, these insane security classifications, if you didn't have all of this in place, you'd already have the metal. And the metal that I talk about enables you to protect life inside a vehicle going into space.
Which is why this latest mission to Mars, this one-way trip, is a money-making scam.
It's BS. It's to keep that myth alive.
Absolutely.
Because they can't. They don't know what I'm talking about. And I've said before, basically, what's unique among the metal, but I've never told anybody how to make it. But it's being made in the sun right now.
The specific metal that you can use to protect a craft.
Substructure of this planet, substructure of our moon, substructure of everything that you see in space, it's spherical.
So the metal that you talk about is part of that substructure. That's what they make it with.
Yeah, but just because you have a piece doesn't tell you how to make it, because this metal is unique. It's not like anything. It can do something that nothing here that can be made here can do.
And it's not something that we want to give them either.
No. So the Black Knight satellite.
So what is it? I've seen pictures of it, and it is unusual.
It's an airborne time cylinder in a way, or time capsule. What it is, it's the key to how to get into where the history of your entire lineage, back to where you had your own system and everything. It's a key to how to get into that. It's Phobos, of course.
Right, okay.
Phobos was put up by your ancestors.
So leading nicely on from that, because we've got the Black Knight satellite, which you've just said is a key to get the history of mankind and our history and how we arrived here. Does it also tie in with what was found in the Bushegi Mountains?
What's in the Bushegi Mountains has to do with the people that were on Mars when your ancestors came to Mars, came into this system that helped them establish on Mars, because at the time Mars was a better candidate for them than Earth, because Earth was in upheaval. These people lived under the surface of Mars, and they were reaching the highest level ET can reach, and that is spiritual technology. And yet they still maintained a foot in the more mortal realm. So they helped. They knew that your moon, which was your vehicle at the time that you came into this system, they knew that that was not right for Mars, it was not right for Earth, so they managed to help you keep it because it had materials, it had minerals on it and everything that you wanted to utilize to continue, if you needed to survive. your ancestors knew how to make the metal. They just wanted to do everything themselves, and it was in the final stage of being able to establish themselves as ETs, on par with the extended community, that they made the biggest mistake of all. And that was that they tried to drill into the mantle of Mars, which was too undeveloped to do so, and so it wrecked the environment. And next, so they had to come to Earth, and that's when these advanced people, the Druge, that's when they established these engines and the machines in the moon so that the moon could be kept in orbit around the Earth. And when they did this, they also created vast workings underground, like you see in the Bosegi Mountains. They're in other places too. One of them is in Antarctica and is responsible for maintaining a semi-tropical environment right in the middle of the South Pole, practically, for the blondes. And all of this is related. And of course, because I know these things, I know where the article went too dramatic or took too much license, because, the person that wrote it was making guesses. They had some experience, and they wanted to get it out, and they wanted to let people know that of the tremendous virtues that the Druge had, but that they weren't hostile. And of course, Prometheus, somebody got to that article and decided they would make a Hollywood movie. No one is nearly as titillated by a movie that features horror, murder, and mayhem, and so they had to make these people hostile, and that's what they did. And so, we get back to the alien crap, the alien series. Of course, there's intelligent life almost everywhere. And it takes care of, if there were anything like the alien or the predator or any of these other things, they'd be taken care of. They'd be put out of their misery.
Well, it's like you said, civilizations don't get to that stage of development or evolution unless they have gone past the stage where they are warlike. We as a species here on Earth can see that. And it's just a logical next step whereby you remove that aberrancy to then work together as a species, because otherwise it's not going to work. And unfortunately here right now, we have an element within our species that is determined, absolutely determined, to prevent us ever getting to that point, because they want to get there themselves. But what they don't realize is the very way that they are will just never, ever allow them to get to where they want to be.
When World War III is tenable, when it is discussed openly by world leaders, you're wrong. First of all, it's been the nature of man here on this planet in memoriam. Since war, the loser will resort to anything. And of course, you're going to let loose in the arena that we've had since the Cold War. You're going to let loose with everything you got. You can sit down with a pencil and a piece of paper, if you have the slightest scientific background, and figure out the amount of hydrogen and oxygen there is in the atmosphere, and how much of that hydrogen would be absorbed in such a case, and leaving the oxygen volatile. And what happens is another sun. You don't even have to have any help.
Right, okay. I understand that now.
Now, there was a physicist that figured this out back in the 50s, and he published it, and of course for peer review, and never got any further than that. But I happen to know something about it. They don't discuss this. They don't want you to let you know just how insane they are. But if you knew this, then you would be insane to talk about, even consider as a possibility, under any circumstance, the activation of World War III. The only people insane enough to do that are the people that talk about Samson's hammer. Sure. And people need to look that baby up.
I was just going to say, could you just elaborate on that for us a little bit?
I'll say one word, Netanyahu.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yehu. They ought to just call him Yehu.
That's if you cross the line, if you attack Israel, then Israel gives themselves the right to unleash,
obliterate
literally
the rest of us.
Everything on everybody else, not just their enemy.
Every major nation in the world, they won't know where it came from, and they'll launch probably at who they guess it came from, which would probably be Russia, China. And that's the end of it.
Yeah.
That's the end of it for everybody.
Yeah, in a nutshell, basically what you're saying is that if World War III would happen with all these atomic weapons, it would ignite the atmosphere and basically turn the planet into a sun.
Yeah.
There,
I know that.
Yeah.
Look, I imagine there are some physicists that don't know that. There are a lot of big deal politicians that don't know that, but that's because they're not good at what they do.
So it begs the question then, why are they perpetually, although we know the answer, why are they perpetually threatening with World War III? Why? Because it's all financial.
Well, that's it, but it's in their idea of saber rattling, but what they're doing is they're taking an incredible chance because it's like LaRouche came out recently with some interesting things, and then there was a technician, a nuclear weapons technician, that was introduced by Caldecott, who came out in this last meeting that they had where he said that, this is a very dangerous situation because the Soviet Union doesn't have an adequate early warning system, which makes it very dangerous because they could be fooled very easily into thinking they're under attack. You don't even need a tenth of the hydrogen warheads detonated to do this, to turn the Earth into a sun. So,
Which is interesting because in the past you have said, and it is documented, that ET, the off-Earth civilizations that are observing this ridiculousness here, have actually prevented this from happening more than once.
They did in the Soviet Union. They did at different ICBM bases in the United States. There was an experimental, the Soviets in the Caucasus have a installation like what we have in Area 51 in Groom Lake. They have one, and they were doing something they shouldn't have been doing, and so a very large UFO just put it out of commission. They don't know how. It didn't hurt anybody. That's what they can do. They are not hostile, but they have given us extra time, and we should be very thankful for it. They're not going to save us from ourselves.
No, but people need to understand, with all the hostile alien thesis being pushed forward, like an invasion and all this bullshit that they like to talk about. If people can see that and understand that, then surely they must be able to ask themselves, well, if they were so hostile, why would they do that? Why would they do it
after this planet has been turned into a garbage dump?
Exactly. What off-Earth civilization could possibly want this planet?
Well, they're after our gold. The idiots don't realize gold has no meaning to people that don't have an economic system.
Exactly.
At a level of technology that they have no economic system. They can provide for everybody equally. Because you're a big deal politician or you're a wise counselor or an elder or whatever, it doesn't mean you get more money. No, that's vulgar. The idea that they deserve more of everything because they are gifted a different way or whatever is bizarre.
Whilst the rest of us slave around for them.
Yeah. People don't understand. I've talked about even that among the extended community, their pastoral cultures, civilizations, there was a movie made that almost made me cry because it was so close to the truth.
And it was called what?
I don't remember.
Oh, no.
Was that the French film?
If you do remember it, maybe you could add it to your movies you must see list.
I would if I could remember it.
Okay, well, we'll push you on.
I was so touched by it because the people could heal themselves with their minds.
I would imagine there's a lot that humanity does not realize that they can do.
There's people exploring that.
You have to put a value on it, and you're not putting a value on any damn thing that's good.
Well, some of us are.
Well, yeah, quite a lot of us are trying.
You have, but the system doesn't let you get very far.
Of course it doesn't. Speaking as a creative individual, it's disgusting. Nothing is valued unless you are part of, particularly the art scene.
If you're an artist like Pollock or Van Gogh or anybody that in the past, they didn't make the money. Their agent made the money for them.
Yep.
Promoted them, everything. It is because the creative mind isn't mercenary.
Absolutely. And we need to unite.
Edison was the dumbest ass that ever existed as far as an inventor is concerned, but he had good PR. The idiot wanted to provide electricity to every city with DC, direct current. And Tesla couldn't convince him otherwise. And they cheated Tesla. It was such a muck. But no, he had good PR. And that's the only difference between you, Myri, and absolute success is that you don't have a good agent. Get a good agent and you will get off the ground.
Yeah, I'm going deeper than that, just with what we're talking about with the people on this planet and the ongoing struggle.
You got to do something to make a living and have what you need. Being an artist isn't that time consuming.
Oh, La Verbelle. Yeah, The Green Beautiful. That's the movie. Thank you, Shuny.
French.
Yeah,
French.
I've seen it. It's absolutely stunning. It's just, it does make you want to cry because it's.
And none of them want to go to Earth at the very beginning, remember? They were trying to get a volunteer, looking at each other going, no.
Volunteer to come here, let's
like going to Iraq today.
I've said it once, I've said it a million times, I will continue to say it until things start to change. Sometimes I look around me and I know Myrid and many of us feel the same way, as if we just don't belong here because it doesn't feel right. There is something fundamental missing, and it's kindness and goodness and equality, and it's almost like a remembrance of how things should be. So in some ways, even though we have a split consciousness and we cannot remember anything about previous lineages, about star travel, about anything, there is a knowing inside us that everything's wrong here and that it has to change. And sometimes I just think, oh my God, just get me off this planet, I've had enough. But you can't, because if we chose to come here, and I don't know if we did, we're here and we have a responsibility to all the other 7 or 8 billion people out there to try and make it better. Each of us individually has to try and make it better.
Well, there are people that realize they're anomalies, that there are empty spaces, there are voids, whatever, and they try to fill them. And they use their creativity, they use their imagination to try and fill them. And usually that becomes myth.
When you talk about anomaly, this is a huge part of why people are so dumbed down. There are so many anomalies here that are ignored, and then incredulity gets in the way and it's just brushed under the carpet and carry on making the dinner and watching the TV. And is there a specific reason for that? I want you to touch upon the split consciousness and why we are able to just turn the other cheek and not delve deeper into things.
You follow models. And up until about 50 years ago, or maybe a little less than that, you thought, the general public thought that rich men were wise. They thought that they had to have something on the ball. They didn't realize what inside trading was until issues were made here within the last 20 years. You never heard of inside trading. You didn't realize that there were secret societies, and those secret societies had privileges. And that many of these self-made millionaires weren't self-made at all, but they were born with a silver spoon in their mouth and they were given the money to invest.
But what initially, you talk about secret societies that know stuff that we don't. What is it that they know that we don't? Because I have spent a long time, 5 years, talking to you. Us three here know why we have split consciousness. What I want the people listening to understand is what initially created the split consciousness, which has brought us to this 7th extinction, which we are now, which we shouldn't even be here.
Well, the Earth doesn't have a constant gravity wave. It can't hold helium, and helium is part of your original respirant. And then, of course, the readjustment between the engines on Earth and the machines on the moon affect the mind, affect the capacity of the mind to stay on track. And over thousands of years, this is genetically developed into a form of accommodation that's become the split consciousness. It's unique. There is no other case that I can think of or am familiar with where there is anything like this split consciousness, which enables you to be hypnotized, a very bad thing, which forces you to have to sleep and dream so that you can unload, bio-unload. And you got all these problems which waste a lot of time. I can lay down and get all the benefit out of rest in 30 minutes that it takes you 8 hours to. So you don't do well. It's remarkable that you produce the fine people that you do. I mean, down through history, you have produced wonderful things. And, of course, E.T. wasn't knowledgeable of that till I got involved. And I wasn't knowledgeable of it until the third extinction, when I began to kind of slow down from being so quick to do the bidding of elders.
So with this split consciousness, that is obviously monopolized in a big way because they, the bad guys, opportunize it.
Yeah.
In so many ways. We see it in the sexualization of young children. We see it in the whole kind of music industry, far worse now than ever was before.
I don't think that's, I think that split consciousness makes it more possible, but I don't think that the split consciousness features that. What you have here is it has gotten so bizarre, so out of control, that these people delight in going far beyond evil. The idea of self-indulgence, what Crowley called do as thou will. Where there is no wisdom, there is chaos. And of course, if you follow that notion, if you make a law out of what that admonition that Crowley made, what you're doing is you're promising your own demise.
And look what happened to Crowley.
Yeah. You know how he died? He was hung in women's underclothes, hung by the right foot, like the hanging man in the tarot deck. That was the mark that the Masons were involved in his death. He was getting so far out of control. He had done some terrible things to some of the privileged class in England. So he was kind of persona non grata and didn't know it until it was too late. Because he listened to his own voice too much.
So with the split, I mean, I think about this quite a lot because of the creativity of it. For me, it's like always having this yearning to be part of the greater universe, or not just other members of humanity, but the actual universe, the stars. I might look at the stars and the moon. It's not so much communication with the muse, it's an actual yearning for something within the mind that is greater. I'm not explaining this very well, but that's where the potency of creativity comes from, a certain amount of pushing and yearning and almost angst. It's almost like a sadness as well.
I think
that I wouldn't call it a feature of the split consciousness, though.
Right.
I really wouldn't. I wouldn't dignify split consciousness that much.
Okay. So what's wrong with me then?
Well, because you probably know, deep down, that things could be a lot better. And that the only reason they aren't is something you have no power to change. And that causes that anxiety, that causes that futility. That's perfectly understandable, Married. Then that just means you're a good person and you have enough power of expectation to know this is not the way it has to be. And it isn't the way it has to be.
No.
Is that some form of genetic knowledge that is passed down? And when we talk about genetic knowledge, I just want to slightly clarify that. With animals, they are passed via generation to generation genetic knowledge as to how to behave, what to do, how to hunt, etc., etc. With humans, genetic knowledge is passed down, as it were, but then we have to take into account the mind. Now, I want to clarify, and we've done this before, that mind is separate to brain. Mind is an energy field that is able to communicate on a different level. So you have the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, and the superconscious mind. Those three different levels of observation, which J.W. Dunn talked about in his book, The Serial Universe, which is on our reading list, James, is it not? But what's wrap your head around that one because it's not easy.
In fact, you never will completely, because until you actually see a functioning model of unified field, you won't realize fully the reality that can be had with it. And of course, unified field is something that only existed in Dunn's mind as a metaphysical model. And he builds a metaphysical explanation and metaphysical theory on it. brilliantly, and this was done in the 30s, long before Velikovsky and Einstein got together and talked about it.
1924. I have both books.
Yeah. Dunn is an exceptional man. I have a hard time believing that he didn't have an attachment to somewhere else, if you know what I mean.
I know what you mean.
I have a hard time, but then that could be underestimating the genius that's possible in the human mind, in the earthbound human mind.
I think he did work extremely hard. In his first book, An Experiment with Time, I think that's what led on to the serial universe. And he does explain it in his book how when recording his dreams and the dreams of others, there is very much the ability to see time from the future, events that will happen. And this is where he touched upon the serial universe, that time isn't past, present, and future, that you can have the ability via dreams to be able to tap into a future time and then bring it back. But you have to do it straight away. It has to be written down.
It has to be written down. The dream journal is very important because you would be surprised if you'll ever start. I've advised people and talked to them in their success of it. You'd be surprised what they learn about their dreams that they wouldn't have learned without the dream journal because they forget them. Some of the most impactful dreams are the dreams that you forget when you wake up. You know, there are people that get wonderful dreams in the creation of a plot for a novel or a movie script or a song or wonderful lyrics, and they wake up and they run to try to record it, and in that short time between where they find a pencil and paper to record it and they're waking up, they lose it.
Having used this as an exercise myself, I will recommend that having a pad with a pencil attached to the pad, because you don't want to be scrabbling around. It's very important to lie very, very still when you wake up from a dream, either unexpectedly or the dream is still lingering as you wake up naturally. It's very important not to think at all. And when I say think, I mean consciously think of anything like, oh, I need to go to the bathroom, or start thinking about your day. You have to keep it very much in the now, what's happening in that exact moment. And what you will find is it's almost like a barrier. There is a barrier between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind, whereby when you're waking up from a dream, the subconscious mind is still very much in its own environment, and it can leach over the information. The dream can leach over into your conscious mind, which is then able to remember. But sit very, very still, lie still, write down every single small detail that you possibly can do, and you will start to build a dream diary. And I do have a dream diary with a substantial amount of dreams in it.
Then you can prove out what I said then, can't you? I didn't know about lying still, you know, because I don't dream.
It's vitally important. It's one of the most important things, is to lie still, not move, not even twitch, nothing, absolutely nothing. And don't force it. In the dream state, that half waking, half sleeping state, that dream state that you wake up in, it's very important to just let it come, let it flow. Because it will come, because it's almost like a balance between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind, the dreaming mind and the waking mind. And that balance has to be found, because one is not larger than the other at that point of waking. It's almost like the two are combined. And if you lie still, all the information from the dream can be brought forward into the conscious mind, enabling you to write it down. And there is so much detail that you can get in that very, very quiet time, that if you do it repetitively every night, and not everybody dreams every night, not everybody remembers their dreams every night. Sometimes you wake up and you don't remember a dream. That's okay, you know. With Jay Dunn, sometimes it was months between significant dreams. But it is very important to lie still and let that information leach through into the conscious mind, and write everything down that you can possibly remember.
I hate to put people off, but it is hard work, and it's not a lot of stuff. A lot of it I could understand that I was sorting out, and then there would be moments of incredible clarity where I was probably looking at something in the past or possibly in the future, which didn't seem really that significant at the time. And it would be something only personal to me. Like, I had a predictive dream where I was driving with somebody in a car, and that somebody was someone that I just, when I woke up, I thought, why on earth would I be in the car with him? Because of the way the situation was at that particular time. We were just never going to meet again. And sure enough, a year later, I found myself in a car with him. So things like that. What fascinates me about dreams is Crystal. I mean, she had the most phenomenal experience with her dream time, which led to her having extraordinary extra knowledge. You know, this is before she knew or met James. On her own merit, she went and worked on that first book and did an incredible job of it with her research and everything.
There are a lot of people that were impressed by that. What's interesting about dreams is historically, the interpretation of dreams among pontiffs and kings and queens and so forth over centuries has had a great deal to do with history and things that have happened in history that might not have except for dream interpretation. The higher placed people tend to be more in a policy-making frame of mind when they go to bed. So they'll dream about outcomes and so forth as frustration or whatever, like it's a biofeedback enterprise.
Right.
And but they'll come up with things, and an interpreter of dreams who can find the symbolism and how that the subconscious tries to relate to the conscious mind what it sees, and it is flawless, is another thing. And of course, once you know the mechanism involved and the value of being able to interpret dreams, you can interpret them. And I'll guarantee you that there have been even presidents in the United States that have used dream interpreters.
Oh, yeah. Did Hitler not have a pretty important dream when he was in First World War?
And Heinrich Himmler did. A lot of people did. And, of course, they hold these dream interpreters very dear. In history, dream interpreters were the closest to an advisor that there was. The Egyptians had a device to enhance dream recollection. And that's what you see that looks like a big tube in that one mural.
Where did they get that technology from?
From the first dynasty after the Lower and Upper Nile.
Because the first dynasty were not from here, were they?
Well, the first dynasty that actually unified the Upper and Lower Nile were not from here. No. They accelerated nationalism. Up until then, in this lineage, there had not been a true case of nationalism. That was because they understood nationalism was a step in civilization. The first step in civilization and what happened in the New World was based on temple cities. It wasn't true nationalism either. Yeah, there are a lot of things to talk about.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of subjects.
I want to talk about the moon.
Yeah, I want to talk about the moon as well.
Yeah.
It's too important, has to be out there, and it has to be as easy as possible for people to work with and listen to research.
If they'll only research, that's the problem. That's the problem. So many people, they become disenchanted or discouraged and don't go far enough. Unless you go far enough, you're not going to retain much.
Well, this is what we found at the beginning, because all of us individually had been each researching the other part of the cottage industry, and nothing ever works. Nothing ever felt right.
And nothing ever answers any of the significant questions that you have that take it out of an area of vast anomaly and put it in a perspective.
Absolutely.
And this is one thing that I tried to affect when I was on UFO Updates, which was the premier email forum of ufology. Those people resented it, all the old-timers. After one of them died, we found out he was still connected to a government agency. And that was Robert Hall. This sort of thing is just, you have an entire organization that has volunteer workers who think they're doing the right thing. They think they're working for the betterment of mankind, for informing or for disclosure, whatever. And they're working for a government agency. They're working for a corruption that is a government agency, and that's MUFON.
When it comes to anomalies, though, we put this on a list to talk about the moon, and the moon has always, since I was a child, fascinated me. I mean, just staring at it for hours on end, and then years later I thought, well, that means I must be a pagan, and, and to understand and appreciate what James says about it makes perfect sense to me, because of the reading that you can do, or you can still do online, about the moon being hollow. It's older than the Earth. So it's a great anomaly for people to start with, because there it is. You can watch it. You can see the strange things that go on. There's a website, is it translunar phenomena, transient lunar phenomena.
It's there one moment and gone the next.
Yeah,
and the waves that
people
go across the moon.
Yeah.
What's if it's only been detected in the last year? That's because somebody looked for them. They've always been there. Every time these machines are making these adjustments, there's a wave going across. Maybe not of the magnitude that you see, but similar.
Well, maybe not with the visible eye, but with sensors, you would notice that there is this wave of different energy, maybe. I don't know. I'm not a scientist, but someone somewhere must have noticed something.
People will say that's a hologram, James. So, how would you address that? If somebody said to you, well, that means the moon's a hologram.
Another word to throw out there, another catchphrase that explains nothing. It's interesting. Everything is a hologram that appears and has no other explanation. There are holograms, and then there are other types of phenomena. Some people would say that a specter, like a ghost, is a hologram. And in the sense that we're using a catchphrase for something we don't understand more deeply, But in truth, no. And so, no, that's not a hologram. That's an energy wave that's going across there. It isn't a specter of our eyeball. Our eyeball can pick it up. There's so many things that are outside your eye's ability to pick up that are going on in front of you.
The moon is an essential part of the overall design of everything. We need it there. Without it,
it's very important to planet Earth. It was useful. That's another reason that the Druge managed to put it in orbit around the Earth and hold it in orbit, because it moves the magma and creates a constant gravity wave long enough to hold the atmosphere. It's not constant long enough to hold helium, but it's constant enough to do that much.
So the moon in itself moves the Earth's magma. So, okay, let's turn this the other way around. What would happen if the moon wasn't there?
You lose your atmosphere.
Okay.
It'd be back like it was before. Now, they had oxygen to some extent, but they didn't have the mixture of gases that it would take to actually be healthy for your ancestors when they came here.
So the only reason we are still here is because the Druge put the moon shafts, which, if people are interested, there is a link on the blog. If you type moon shafts into the search facility, you will come up with information. And it was actually your great uncle that discovered by accident one of the moon shafts. So the Druge placed the moon shafts into the Earth's mantle to work in conjunction with the machines in the moon to keep it at a certain distance so it didn't come towards us or it didn't go too far away. So basically the two work in conjunction with each other, but only because of the machines within the Earth's mantle, which they know about. The elites know about them.
Yeah, they do. Well, their implementers know about them. What they tell the elite, who only want to hear what they want to hear. And, of course, that is too spiritual a thing. Doing something for someone else just out of the goodwill of your heart, like the Druge did. Nobody do that. We're all animals. We're Animal Farm. Our well served them well. No, that's not something they want to hear. And, of course, you don't tell them something they don't want to hear if you're on their payroll, do you?
No.
Best thing to do is never get on their payroll.
Oh, yeah.
I know one man that was on their payroll that got off their payroll, and I helped him find something to do that would have served him very well, but he had a wife that wanted more. So she eventually got him killed. He was a fellow that developed a market for the mineral. Robert Hyde.
Oh, Robert, yeah.
I mean, the reason I wanted to talk as well about the moon was two reasons. First one is to dispel this carry-on about it being the governor of the Matrix and it's got reptilians doing a slow tango with Kerry Cassidy up there or something like that. I mean, let's just dispel that absolute and utter complete nonsense,
Tell people the physics.
Need to use their brains.
They need to use common sense.
Yep.
What the hell would anybody want with this mess? If they were going to do anything, it would have been a long time ago. Time means nothing to them.
And let's face it, if there were reptilians all over the joint, people would have seen them, and they haven't.
The people have convinced themselves that they've seen them, and the people that perpetuated that particular story have worked very, very hard.
If you fear something enough, that will get down into you so deeply that you will imagine things that aren't there. Freud knew this. A number of people that followed Freud at the time, they knew that. Unless people got over their primordial fears, they would suffer. They would suffer different things. It wasn't so long ago that most people believed in Dante's hell. That is so ridiculous. And I think Dante did a grave injustice to mankind. But, you know, he didn't expect that people would be so childish as to adapt that as an idea of an alternative to life after death.
The other thing was that the ships that are behind the moon that we know have been there for off and on or still there for quite some time, that's in connection with what's happening on planet Earth, is it not? And is it not the case that if the planet goes, it's all over, the moon will be taken elsewhere?
They'll tractor it to Mars, bring Mars back to life, do some other things. But if the Earth was a sun, you see, the moons of Jupiter would have their oceans again.
So, and what's happening on Mars?
Huge dust clouds.
Yeah, these dust clouds that are so large that they are visible from Earth.
Well, there are a lot of people on Mars. They're just not earthbound humans. And, you know, the EBEs better not go back because they decided before the EBEs, if they had humans amongst them, they wouldn't be attacked. But now it's hands off because of the way things have gone. When Fukushima was caused, it began to change that equation.
Why was that?
Because it's a time bomb. I mean, your days are numbered unless you make a pact to change your ways here on Earth.
So,
and not be a danger to your neighbors.
Yeah. So
you get into an area with this Hadron Collider, you're getting into an area where it's going to impact back on other planets. Yeah. It's going to impact on people here that are knowledgeable and not earthbound.
Well, why don't you touch upon the Hadron Collider, James? Because
Hawkins.
Hawkins.
It deals specifically with subatomic particles. And of course, these subatomic particles generate a potential storehouse of energy, a potential look back into the earlier situation of the universe, because what they're looking at is a microcosm of what happened to the macrocosm. When they say stupid things like find the God particle, I know how far off base they are.
So what you're saying is that they could create on Earth a Big Bang as we understand it in our limited scientific.
What amazes me is they're not worried about any kind of containment of what they're doing. That's what worries me.
Professor Hawkins is. He says it should not be done.
I agree with him. I agree completely with him. I mean, I'm surprised that he reached that conclusion. More power to him. I mean, when someone's right, they're right. And you give them credit for it. When they're wrong, you do the other thing. No, but he's absolutely right. Not just because I've said that.
It's illogical that you would want to create a black hole on this planet. You know, humans never stop to think afterwards, after the fact, whether or not they should have done it. Yes, they can do it, but should they do it?
Well, that's the point. You hit the nail on the head. The obsession is, well, we got to do it first. If it's a bad thing, we got to do it first. Does that make sense to you, Taurus?
No, it does not.
If it's a bad thing, we got to do it before our enemy does it. All this shit. I mean, this is the most backward form of thinking there is. And, of course, it'll get you nowhere. Well, it could bring you to the end.
And could it also not just, destroy us, but have an impact, beyond that? So,
of course, it could. I mean, it depends. I don't think they have the capability to do much damage, but there's nothing good going to come out of it. I can tell you that.
Well, containment-wise, anything that we do here, even though we are, I would imagine, quarantined, containment-wise, if we were allowed to continue along this path, surely creating a black hole here would have repercussions for the off-Earth civilizations that are out there.
It couldn't be contained.
It couldn't, no.
No, couldn't be contained. And it's insane to speculate on this basis because they're doing what's never been done before, so they don't know what the hellish outcome could be. But, You're dealing with people that have a clipboard, and that's their God. And that's the best way of putting it, I think.
So with the people that are on Mars already, well, they're not humans, obviously, they're whatever race there are, or there's several different races there. I mean, what's going on Mars?
They're doing different things. There's different cultures, and of course, there are 8 different origins of these people, and they're doing different things. Mostly has to do with Earth, trying to figure out what's likely to happen here. And it's kind of like a way of gambling, I guess, laying bets, which they don't do, but because that's for money or whatever, and they don't enter into it. But what the basic attitude, I guess, would be is that this is a drama, and they're interested in seeing how it turns out.
Yeah, because some of the Mars rover images. Okay, let's just say this. Who's cleaning the solar panels? Somebody's cleaning the solar panels, and it's not us. And some of the images are very interesting because they do show, again, anomalies, which if you understand that Mars was once inhabited by our ancestors before we destroyed that planet as well, and then had to come here, of course there may well be anomalies on the surface of the planet. The two lead back to each other. Everything always leads back to what you tell us. And there is always a next step to be able to logically understand why we are here.
The important thing that Kevin found, he found a number of things, but this, as far as Mars is concerned, what he found was an excavation. He exposed what looked like the front of a steam train. A steam engine train. The plate with the bolts, it had bolts on it. It was quite evident, and someone had started an excavation around it, and they had taken off about a foot of ground equally around it, and it was all level and clean there, which meant that it had been fairly recent because there's winds on Mars and dust storms. So it was undeniable what it was, and he showed it, and he also showed a creek with running water, and it had a pump on it, and all kinds of, and the pump was at the right place where the creek would be, so the foot valve wouldn't get dredged up and stopped up. And just on and on and on. I mean, there's one thing after another. At a time, there was a vast gape, the size of about 10 Earths, in the sun. And if you look down into it, you could see objects within their substructure. And I've said there are people that live there in the sun, and people think I'm crazy.
They think that you're crazy. They do not have a knowledge base to build upon. They are incapable of comprehending how people could live in the sun because they don't understand the physics.
I'll tell you what the physics are. Spiritual technology.
Okay, so you've mentioned spiritual technology quite a few times tonight. When you say that to me, I just have a blank. I have nothing to build upon.
You know that the mind can exist as a field.
Yes.
And when it's active, it is. It's just like a hard drive of a computer. Well, you can encase it then in an energy device that is protected, can't you? It can be ionized. And protect you from anything, protect you from heat. I can tell you how to make a metal and alloy it so perfectly that as a grain will pass off heat as fast as it picks it up. You could make a suit and walk through the sun in it.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
How is that spiritual technology?
Well, not the latter. It's not. But encasing your mind, a being that has reached the level of spiritual technology where they want to exist as mind alone.
Right, with no physical. Got you.
No,
Right. Which is basically what the Druze did.
Yeah, they ascended to that, and so did the Abright and others. The Abright were the people that created EBEs for deep space travel.
Yeah.
And then left some of them out there, and they replicated themselves. And, I think they watched too many I Love Lucy episodes and went nuts.
Well, that's interesting because we mentioned the Druge tonight, we've mentioned the EMVs, but now you've just introduced another name, which is the Abroit. And as you've just said, as I understand it, the Abroit were a civilization that lived next to a gravitic anomaly, in other words, a black hole. Now, rather than sending their own people through that black hole to investigate what was on the other side, they created...
Well, now, I didn't tell you that. Where did you pick that up?
You did tell me that. I've been listening
Did I tell you that?
Yeah, I've been listening to you for 5 years now.
That was what they had. They wanted to explore a series of areas of 3 galaxies. And so they were too humane to send one of their sentient beings out there to investigate. So they created the EBEs. The dead giveaway about the EBEs, and the one that everyone should remember, is that they don't recover their own.
I think what's important to also clarify is that when we are talking about EBEs, we are talking about what has been represented as the Greys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And when you say they don't recover their own, that means they have no sentience. They don't care.
Because they just make another one. All they are chunks of meat sewn together with a computer terminal.
Yeah.
They stick their hand in a panel to pilot their vehicles, and they're not good technicians. They're fair technicians, but they're not scientists. They can't explain how to make the metal, for instance.
So they are, exactly as the Air Force named them, extra biological entities. They are basically a computer terminal with skin on the outside.
Yeah, exactly.
No sentience.
And if you ever look at the gray, and they're gray because that flesh will turn gray when it's not revitalized with blood. And what they use instead of blood is a form of plasma that is more plastic than biological. That's why they stink. I don't like them. Phil Schneider shares that with me.
The smell is something that many people have said over the years, but what's important to note is that those within the military-industrial complex have chosen to strike a deal with them in some ways, which is an interesting part of the Busegi Mountain document that we read the other day, and they were in the chamber, obviously, that we know the Druge had built. They discussed, is this the same race that are in cahoots with the American government? And the scientist or the gentleman that was there said, God, no.
Right. They were Druge. They were Druge, and they were tall, 9 feet, and very thin, and had a long reach. Their arms had a long reach, longer than our arms are proportionate to our bodies. But they built accommodations for earthbounds too, because they were bringing some of your ancestors that have gone elsewhere. At the time of the migration from Mars, you had some that had stayed on Mars, and they saw what was happening on Earth. They didn't want any part of it. So they, with the help of the Druge, put together some craft, and they went elsewhere. And they turn their noses up now at earthbounds and want you done in. You're an embarrassment. But that's because, they haven't experienced what's going on here, and they don't care to. So they remain aloof, they're unreachable, but they're your greatest detractors, and I don't like them particularly anymore than I like some of the blondes. I like the elder of the blonde, and I like the lady blondes, but I don't like the men blondes, except the elder.
That's interesting. That's actually really interesting what you just said, because in my mind, as you were discussing this section of our ancestors that had the capability to just turn their back on us.
Yeah, they were so disgusted with what they saw. They saw this caste system developing here on Earth. They didn't want any part of it. They had stayed on Mars as kind of a cleanup crew. And so after a certain amount of time had passed, I guess maybe 10 years or 20 years, time doesn't mean the same thing. And they kept holding back, and finally, we don't want to go.
Because they were able to witness what was happening here. And the reason it was happening was because the moon shafts weren't working correctly in correlation with the moon, so therefore the helium was escaping the atmosphere. That
was part of it. But the main thing was the settings. The Druge didn't worry about it because they knew that if they wanted, they had the access to things like you saw in the Busegi article, that they could go down, they could adjust the machines or the engines, and get a constant gravity wave, hold helium, and wouldn't continue on for generation after generation until you had the split consciousness. After 30,000 years, things happen that persist through generations thereafter. And that's what happened. But the split consciousness was an effect, immediate effect, and then it became genetic. And so now it is part of the species, which I think is not especially a bad thing, because I think I see too many good people that have adjusted to it that I can reach, that I think a lot of, that have an emotional maturity and grasp of so many things and common sense, that I think that it's a sociable phenomena. I don't see the downside to it that some detractor might, like your former ancestors that went elsewhere. They want you gotten rid of.
So due to unforeseen circumstances, we have become a unique species. Are we the only ones like this because of the split consciousness?
I hope so. I hope so.
Well, yeah, I'd agree with you on that one for many reasons. But at the same time, humanity is capable of such great beauty and art and poetry.
I know. Well, I love the people here, and I want the best for them. But, it looks like you're going to do yourselves in if something isn't done. They got to get rid of that White House crew. They got to get rid of them. I mean, it looks like they don't care what they do. They don't have any guidance at all. Start proceedings against Obama because he's given them plenty of cause. Plenty of cause.
Do you really think there's anybody here brave enough to do that?
No. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm proven wrong. There are a lot of people that are concerned and agree with me, but then there's some that don't.
Is there any hope for us?
Sure. It's just a matter of change. It's opposition to change that brings a culture down. Always.
But without the knowledge that there is something better, then how can we possibly have something to hope for, to change for?
What have you to lose by trying?
Exactly. We are at the stage where we have nothing to lose.
This is where a healthy sense of outrage comes in. You got to get fed up with these people doing these ridiculous things. I mean, the minute that any world leader started talking about World War III, they should have said, well, you step down. You just give up your office. We don't want you. You're no damn good for the world. That's the way it's done. You see, the one thing about humans here is they can't stand censorship or shunning. And that's what you do to these people. And you face off with these idiots, these people that have hoarded out in the media, and you just say, you tell the truth or you get the hell out. Well, look what's happened to Brian Williams, and, it ought to be happening to a bunch more. O'Reilly is another liar. I mean, they're liars on a personal level. They're not just liars, in that they love to disseminate the BS they're given, but they love to make up bullshit about, I was in a danger zone, I was this, I was that, Well, no, you weren't. You're a liar.
There are people who have worked within the media industry, very deeply within the media industry, that are now coming out and saying everything that you see in the news is a lie.
Yeah, but they're having to give up their jobs when they do it.
Well, isn't that always the case with whistleblowers? Yeah. You have to give up your life in order for the betterment of the whole. This
is why I think so much of Snowden. I've never seen anyone as young as him make that sacrifice.
Have you watched Citizen-4 yet? Did you manage to watch it?
No, I haven't.
You must watch it. I recommend it.
All right, I will.
Yes, a huge sacrifice. Self-sacrifice as well.
What is odd, what a strange time to bring on a series about the communism of the 50s. They've got a series now on television called The Americans, and it's about the communist cells in America during the 50s.
So what would they be polling people's public opinion with that? Because we know they do.
Well, that's the direction they're moving, isn't it? It's just like Putin says, you're more communist than we ever were. They're not socialist. These people are communists. They want you to live by the bureaucracy. Don't they?
Well, that's the same. Well, here it's even worse. It's fascism. It's like, Cameron's determined
Well, it is fascism. But there are people here that don't know the difference between fascism and communism, so I say communism because that's the only way you reach them.
Okay.
If you said fascism, they say, well, that's a police state. But there's so much more. It's a corporate fascism that we're living under. And if you doubt that, just read the articles of the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement.
TPP.
Yeah.
Of which there is lots of information previously on the blog, because we've discussed everything that we've discussed tonight in great detail as well. And, many of us have come to the conclusion that we're just saying the same thing over and over and over again. But, it's exactly what they do. The repetitiveness. You don't say something once and people don't take it in. You have to repeat it over and over and over again.
That's what we're fighting fire with fire. I don't like repetition. I don't like redundancy. I don't like the mundane. But I partake in it because this is the way you communicate with people here. And I don't look down on them for that, because it's in their educational system, it's in their media, it's even in their movies. And, if I was going to make a movie, it damn sure wouldn't be repeating what everybody was used to.
Well, we as Brits notice this when we watch American programs, because the amount of repetition is actually quite shocking. It's dizzying.
Oh, yeah. It's mind control.
Yeah.
What they're doing is they're implanting a concept. And if it's repeated enough, they get that point across. Now, that doesn't mean it's mind control per se. What it is it's kind of like what advertising agencies used to call opinion farming. I mean, name recognition is a big deal with these ad agency people. And where do you think these advisors come from that are teaching these politicians how to win elections? They're ad agency people.
So the whole system here is rotten, completely and utterly rotten.
Self-facilitatingly rotten.
But there are people within this system that have realized.
Yeah.
People like ourselves, Crystal. There's so many people I could mention.
Always are, and they're coming forth. A lot of them are coming forth. They have splendid things to say. I take my hat off to them. I support them in any and every way that I can. Mostly what I do is I put their stuff up on my wall and comment on it. If you can get people to look at things in a way they can analyze and that they can build a broader context with, you're giving them foot up, because nobody does that here. Unless it's bullshit, unless it's for war, unless it's to promote some candidacy or whatever that's rotten to the core. You got so much of this drivel that is put out to sell a Democrat Party or the GOP or whatever, when really it's nothing but drivel. It doesn't have anything to do with improving a damn thing for the people. Nothing. But, of course, it starts out with the straw horse and straw dog and straw cat that, we'll get there. We're interested in you. We're, this and that. And they're not. They're just BS artists. And they accept that. If you said, well, you're a BS artist, and candid to them, and you were working in one of their campaigns, they just look at you and smile. Because they can't argue with you. They have enough respect that you know enough about the game to know that that's absolutely true. So why would they argue with you? They know it. They don't glorify themselves. They'll tell you right away, I'm pragmatic. Every one of them will say, I'm pragmatic. Yeah. They think that that's the saving grace for being whored out. I'm a pragmatist. That changes everything. That's as accountable as it gets for them.
Myra, Shuny, is there anything that you wanted to bring up?
There was a second thing on the list. I don't know what it was about, but it's to do with what you mentioned it last night. Something on the blog. Do you want that we show up?
Yeah.
What was that?
I read it again recently, and it was almost like a timely reading, something that happened without me consciously being aware of it. And it just ties in nicely with the message that we are not alone, and that there is help available to us. But it's not going to be given to us on a plate. We have to work for it, and we have to change things here before we can then move on.
Well, the one thing that I've come across, there was one gentleman who called in a lot to Kevin Smith and who I met who just can't understand why ET doesn't step in and save us from ourselves. I mean, do you want to be self-determining or do you want somebody to make your decisions for you? It doesn't work. Nobody wants to be occupied. Nobody.
But the whole human race is occupied. This is how we're brought up.
So you're not going to be saved by being occupied then, are you?
Well, no, but this is our mentality. We know no different. We do not know that we have a choice.
Well, in 1776 they did. Just before the French Revolution they did. Mm-hmm. Now, the French Revolution was the bloodiest thing you ever saw. I was sickened. Anybody that had a powdered face got guillotined. It didn't make any difference whether they were children even.
The streets of Paris ran with blood.
It did. It made me sick. But of course the aristocracy brought it on. They made people the way they were with their excesses.
And we're close to that now. I mean, there's an element of that building now.
The only difference between now and then is that it isn't as quiet as open, but it's getting there. People that want the truth about these child sacrifices and Satanism and all the rest of it, if they want the truth, they can find it. We put it out there. I find enough articles on it that are convincing to anybody that is beyond wanting to hear only what they want to hear. And unfortunately, there's still a lot of people that fall in that category that they only want to hear what they want to hear, which means they don't want to hear the truth.
No.
Because they don't want to hear the truth.
Because the truth upsets their own reality, which in a microcosm of their lives is the only way that they know how to deal and get through life. And this is not an insult to anybody, but they don't have the scope to be able to reach beyond that, to see the bigger picture for all of us. If you remove yourself from this planet on a mental level and then look down in on it, you can only sit and shake your head and think, oh my God, what have we done? What have we allowed to happen as a species?
Well, you've got people like Pamela. This was an early English novel, and she just felt that this was the best of all possible worlds. And everywhere she went, she got kicked in the teeth. It was like Oh Lucky Man. Oh Lucky Man was a modern Pamela, although Oh Lucky Man's 30 years old. Oh Lucky Man, if you guys haven't seen it, you need to see it.
Isn't that the prequel to A Clockwork Orange?
What they did is somebody decided Oh Clockwork Orange didn't go far enough, and so they made Oh Lucky Man. It did. And, I mean, it's got everything in it. And, of course, it's got the same actor.
Yeah.
Malcolm McDowell? Is it Malcolm McDowell? I keep thinking it is. Yeah, and, of course, he's a lucky man, and he's Pamela. He can't believe that people are that way and that this is going on, and he just keeps trying to find some excuse not to believe it. But eventually, everything happens to him. He gets framed. He gets this. He gets that. He keeps meeting up with this beautiful woman that keeps cutting masterpieces out of frames, doing just anything she wants to do, and finds out that her father is this big baron who is extremely rich and everything. And so he makes his acquaintance, and then so the baron frames him. And the deal is, I mean, it is gory. It deals with every evil imaginable. And the deal is that he gives him this gold bars to go out and pay somebody for hauling this jelly, which is similar to what Israel is using on the Warsaw Ghetto, on the people in the Warsaw Ghetto. It's worse than napalm. And so they want to use it on these people in these African villages where they want the land and they want their minerals. So in the middle of the transition, the police come out and pick him up. They don't mess with anybody else. They got their scapegoat, you see. Mm-hmm. So he goes to prison. He goes to prison for what, you see what I'm saying? It's one thing after another. I mean, a nuclear power plant fries, right there in northern England. All kinds of stuff.
I've not seen that film. I've heard you talk about it many times.
Oh, you got to see it. It covers everything. Everything that Clockwork Orange avoided, it deals with.
Oh, I didn't enjoy watching Clockwork Orange.
No, I don't want to watch any of them. To be honest,
I'm overloaded with violence.
It's not just that. I just can't. I've only just recently started to relax enough to read a book after the last few years of looking at Fukushima. I'm at the sense of urgency in my body when I wake up in the morning is just, I have to calm myself down. Even thinking about the Pacific dying, even watching a film, I have to just go into that film and say, okay, this is a moment where I'm not aware of the bigger picture, where, the immense suffering that is happening. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, you have to become ambivalent in many ways in order to survive here, don't you? Because
it's a level of denial, but too many people are in denial, and when you're not in denial and you're around people who are in denial, that's one of the reasons I'm practically a hermit, to be perfectly honest, because I cannot bear talking about or listening to people talking about EastEnders or shades of frigging grey.
It is chit-chat, irrelevant.
The planet is dying.
Yeah.
Your children are not going to have food to eat when they grow up. You won't have grandchildren if we carry on like this. That's the reality. It's not a hologram. It's not a fairy story. It's real.
Yeah. And so many
Sorry
people...
to be so black, but
I love that. Just keep it up. Yeah, I love it, Myra. I love it because it's the way everyone should be. Everyone should feel that outrage.
I do, and I understand that we all need a comfort zone. I've got one as well, which is my dog. I would be in a loony bin if I didn't have those things to stabilize me and ground me and so on. But I can understand someone, for example, like Crystal going off in it, and she has a son and Tor has children, and I don't have children, but that doesn't matter in any way, shape, or form, because it disgusts me that we are losing an entire ocean right now. I'm only 54. I never thought I would. I read Rachel Carson when I was young.
Yeah.
She was my hero.
Yeah, mine too. Silent Spring was a masterpiece. And it changed things. It got rid of DDT.
Yeah. Well, can you imagine how she would feel if she was around now? She would be tearing her hair out. Did she foresee this? Did she think for 1 minute that we would get to this point?
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't think she probably let herself believe that it would get to this point, but that it could. Yeah. She did what she could. And the lady, as far as I'm concerned, died before her time. But I was so impressed with her. There are two ladies that I look back and think so highly of. One was Rachel Carson. The other was Adele Davis. Adele Davis changed the whole scope and breadth of nutrition and brought it into the real world and set the pace for people scrutinizing doctors' advice. She set the pace for it. I was very lucky. I found a book back when I had low blood sugar, and nobody recognized it as a disease. You'd talk to a doctor about you lose the strength in the shoulders and the back and legs and fall. And they just said, well, when you feel that way, eat a candy bar. Well, that's the worst thing you could do. So I found a book called Low Blood Sugar in You by Carlton Fredericks, who was a doctor. And it opened my eyes. And from then on, I'd read everything I could get my hands on. The next book I read was The Doctors. It told about how many people had died in New York State during 1 year from iatrogenic disease. That's disease caused by treatment. Like going in and taking the wrong leg off of a kid, a kid that had to have his leg amputated and they took the wrong leg off, shit like that. You won't believe how many times that sort of shit happens. Won't believe it.
Yeah. Yeah, they're just nothing more than drug pushers. And I appreciate surgery, good surgery and surgeons, but they still make mistakes and there's still very serious cock-ups that happen if it goes wrong. But I'm really grateful, touching wood here, that I've never had to be in a hospital or in an operation or anything like that. And I very rarely go to the doctor. I'll try everything before I even think about going to the doctor to heal myself. But to stay with the topic of Fukushima and the Pacific Ocean, I want to just briefly mention the cities of the sea, which fascinated me even before I think I sensed something about the sea when I was younger anyway, but could you explain a bit of the cities of the sea? And we know that they have left the Pacific, but they're still active in the other oceans on the planet, on Earth.
They were specialized, engineered organisms that not single cell, but organisms sort of like, none of them were as large as a starfish, but they would look like a bed of algae, but with different colors, very vibrant, a lot of red. And they would luminesce at night. And of course, they had the ability to ingest plutonium waste and turn it harmless. And of course, that's why they were constructed, because the fuckers were dumping plutonium waste in the Atlantic Trough. So the Atlantic still has them, but the Pacific doesn't. The Pacific is lost and they've left. We don't desert. Our ET does not desert its work. And there was nothing left that could be done. Once tritium began showing up in the Pacific, it was over.
Yeah.
The only thing that can recover the Pacific now is ET technology.
It's a whole ocean. And let's face it, all the oceans are actually connected.
Yeah, and it helps us breathe.
One of the things that's going to be insisted upon is to stop making bags and these Coke cartons or soda pop cartons out of plastic.
Plastic, yeah.
Because the ocean is full of them. Both oceans. And that's going to stop. They're going to clean that up, or they would clean that up, and they would clean the radiation up in the environment, the air and the sea, and everything. I mean, you would have Earth the way it was. And the coal mines, there's a way of using flumes in burning coal that collects all the carbon. So, these types of advances, but a lot of things that have to change. I mean, every option that improves the health of the worker and the environment would be explored. Enterprises would be around things that would do that, that do it better. That would give you a healthy economy. That would give you not just a healthy economy, but a healthier planet. And use their devices preventing damage to babies when they're born, which you don't do. They use forceps still on the heads and shit.
And then we inject them full of mercury.
Yeah.
Well, they don't put the work they need to into developing anything that's curative. They cause more disease than they help.
Autism is not a disease. It is a symptom. It's
so
symptomatic.
So is cancer. So is cancer. I mean, there's so many things that are not, we're told they are. So if we're not given the right information, we can't do anything about it. It'll just get worse, but it'll continue the treatment and the profit making. And that's what it's designed to do.
And if the cancer doesn't kill you, the chemotherapy will.
Yeah, well, the chemotherapy and the radiation are things that cause cancer. Why can't people figure that out?
Because the information is suppressed by the media, again.
And the industry that wants to make a great deal of money out of everyone being sick.
Yeah.
I don't think to this day that my stepfather died from cancer. I think he died from radiation.
I know full well that my grandmother would have survived.
Well, he had an infection in his throat, and they started radiation without curbing that infection. The dead cells migrated to the pancreas and killed his pancreas. He could have still lived, but he didn't want to live with a bag around that he had to eat through and all that shit. He didn't want to live that way, so he willed himself to death. I was there holding his hand when he died, and I felt his spirit leave him. He's a good man.
I remember something similar with my own father, and Myra, you've mentioned it as well with your own mother. The actual spirit, the spirit of the human being, call it the battery, the life force, And what people need to understand is that when we talk about mind being a separate entity, an energy field, the spirit is also separate from the physical body. It's an energy, and you cannot destroy energy. Energy will move on. So this is not the sum all and be all of what we are as a species. Okay, well, thank you, James and Shuny and Myrid, for taking the time to come together on this 5th anniversary show. I, for one, have really enjoyed it. And as always, I tend to learn something new from James. Let's do this again, because there are still so many subjects that need to be touched upon and can be gone into in depth. And hopefully we'll do another interview soon and get it out on the blog for everybody to listen to. So thank you again for your time this evening, and I'm sure you'll be hearing from us all again soon.
All right.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, and I actively encourage questions. So,
Yeah.
If people do have questions, please reply in the comments section at the bottom. And any links that we've referred to or websites, we'll put them in there as well for people to find. Okay, take care of yourself. So we'll call that It's a Wrap. So,
all right.
Yeah, it's a wrap. Thanks, all of you.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Excellent. All right.
All right.
Cheers, guys.